Thank you for clicking on Dark Choices Part 2. If you haven't seen the first part, you go ahead and click on the link above, and you can watch the first part before continuing on. If you've already seen the first part, then let's continue. Christopher walked out of the gym. He was tired and a little exhausted from dancing all night. He had a good time, met some new people, and especially enjoyed his time with Jennifer. She was a wonderful dance partner. He looked forward to seeing her again. He had just waved to his friends and started home when he caught sight of something out of the corner of his eye. Turning to look, he saw the man, Draven, go behind the gym. Christopher considered not following him, but his curiosity got the better of him, and he followed. He moved quickly to catch up to him, but despite hurrying, when he got behind the gym, Draven was nowhere to be seen. Then all of a sudden, he felt a chill come over his body and heard Draven's voice behind him. How did he do that? Christopher, it's a pleasure to see you again so soon. You had a fun night, I hope? Christopher was startled, but managed to keep calm and turned around, facing Draven. I did have fun, thank you. Are you following me? Draven nodded. You caught me. I have been following you ever since you beat up that man in the alleyway. Christopher thought back to that day. He didn't know how he knew this, but he was certain that the feeling he felt the other day, leaving the alley, was his body's way of telling him that Draven had been there. It was the same feeling he felt when Draven had just appeared behind him. He knew now that Draven was the person who killed Frank that night. It was you. You killed Frank. Draven grinned, showing his teeth. Christopher noticed he had bigger than average incisors. Yes, I killed that man. I had been following him for a while that night. I was the hunter and he my prey. I fed on him and dropped him back down into the alleyway. I have been hunting through the ages, feeding, killing as I please, and I want you to join me. Christopher stood there with his mouth open. He was in shock. This man, Draven, was a murderer, and he wanted him to join him? Join him in what? Some sort of hunting sport? No, he said he'd been doing this for ages. How old was he? What was he? He looked at Draven again. He was no longer smiling, but he thought back to those teeth, those incisors. He said he'd been feeding. No, it couldn't be. Could it? Is he a vampire? Christopher didn't want to believe it, but he felt in his soul, however unlikely, that vampires were real, that he was now face to face with one. He wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't respond. He was stuck there, unable to move. No longer able to hide his feelings, he spoke in a shaky voice. What do you want from me? I want you to join me, to become a vampire, and let me teach you all I know. I can nurture it and bring out the best in you. Make me a vampire? Immortality? But at what cost? To live a life of blood and death? Christopher could feel a weight pressing down on his chest. He felt heavy. His mind was fuzzy. It was hard to think, but he managed to slightly shake his head. No, thank you. Draven laughed ever so slightly. Do you think you have a choice? Normally you wouldn't, however this time is different. You do have a choice, but not the one you think you have. Not the one you probably want. Christopher raised his eyebrow quizzically. What do you mean? Draven smiled. You'll find out soon enough. Speak with your uncle next time you see him. You'll have to make your choice. You have 1 week. At that, Draven disappeared, melting into the shadows. Any doubt that Christopher might have had that this man was a vampire left at the sight of Draven, melting into nothingness. The weight that Christopher felt lifted when Draven melted into the shadows. Uncle Oliver knew Draven? Did he know he was a vampire? Christopher took off at a run, trying to put as much space between him and the scene that had unfolded before him. It didn't take long for him to get home. Despite the cold, he was covered in sweat. He was out of breath. He didn't stop till he was inside his house. He slammed the door behind him, locked it, and collapsed against it. He sat there against the door for a while, catching his breath before standing back up. He immediately walked to the kitchen, picked up the phone, and called his uncle. He didn't even care that it was past midnight. The phone rang 3 times before his uncle picked up. Hello? Oliver speaking. Uncle Oliver, I saw him, Draven. You'll think I'm crazy. You probably won't believe me, but he isn't human. Look. I think he's a vampire. Christopher thought that his uncle would think him crazy, that he would laugh, tell him that he was making things up, imagining things. But he didn't, and that's what worried Christopher the most. On the other end of the phone, Oliver spoke. Christopher, don't go anywhere. I'll be right over. We need to talk. Christopher spent the time waiting for his uncle by turning on all the lights of the house. He even made sure to lock every door and every window. He didn't think that it would help, but it gave him a sense of safety he was drastically yearning for. He was walking back downstairs when he heard a knock on the door. Was it his uncle? He didn't expect him to be there so quickly. He walked to the door and checked who it was by looking through the peephole. He saw his uncle standing there in a black trench coat. Christopher was relieved and opened the door, letting his uncle in. "Hello, Uncle. I'm sorry it's so late. Come in." Oliver walked in. "I'm glad you called me. Maybe we should sit down." Christopher nodded. "A good idea." They both walked into the living room. Christopher sat down on the couch while Oliver took a seat in the recliner. Oliver said nothing. He patiently waited for Christopher to speak first. It looked like Christopher was about to speak. He looked over at his uncle. His mouth opened, but nothing came out, and he closed it again. He's going to think I'm insane. He stood up and started pacing the room. He couldn't sit still. All the while, his uncle watched him. Maybe he'll think I'm insane, but Draven was the one to tell me to talk to my uncle. Why was that? They did know each other. After a bit of pacing, Christopher finally decided what he would say and turned to Oliver. "Draven is a vampire." He expected his uncle to start laughing, call him crazy, maybe he'd even put him in a mental hospital, but his uncle did nothing, and it was unnerving. Christopher spoke a bit unsteadily, filling in the silence. "He said I should speak to you?" His uncle folded his hands together in front of him in contemplation before beginning to speak. "Yes, I was expecting this. I talked to Draven tonight." Christopher was a bit shocked. "You talked to him? Did you know he's a vampire? Did you know he wants to kill me and turn me into some undead thing?" His uncle, with his hands still folded, nodded slightly. "Yes, I talked to him, and I know his intentions." "You knew his intentions? What are we going to do about it? How do we stop a vampire? I don't want to die." Oliver sighed. "I'm sorry, but you don't have a choice. You're going to die, and you're going to become a vampire. But you have a choice about who turns you." Christopher didn't understand. "I don't have a choice? Has he already given up on me? That's not like him." He didn't say anything and went and sat back down on the couch, the hint of a stunned look still on his face. What did he mean, a choice of who turns me? There is another vampire? He looked over at his uncle. "What do you mean I have a choice about who turns me? What do you mean?" Oliver sat there, a slight look of pity across his face. "Yes, you'll be able to choose who kills you and turns you into a vampire." "A choice? What other vampire?" Oliver looked into Christopher's eyes, making sure they connected before simply stating, "Me." Christopher's mouth dropped open. "Uncle Oliver is a vampire? Impossible! I've known him most of my life. He eats food, drinks water, he walks out in the daylight. It can't be." He managed to stammer out, How is this possible? How long have you been a vampire?" "I've been a vampire for a very long time, much longer than you've been alive. Vampires are not like in the movies. We can eat and drink food, although we don't need to, and we can walk in the daylight, although our power is diminished." Despite his shock, he was slightly relieved that vampires might not be what he thought they were. Maybe he wouldn't have to kill if he were forced to become a vampire. "So, you can eat food. Does that mean you don't have to drink blood?" Oliver shook his head slightly. "I'm afraid that you will still need to drink blood. But you are lucky. You no longer have to kill to survive. You can drink blood from blood banks." Christopher fell back into the couch, the reality of the situation sinking in. His uncle had lied to him his whole life. He looked over at his uncle. "Do my parents know what you are?" Oliver nodded. "Yes, they know. I've known your father since he was a boy. Your mother found out a lot later, after she married your father." Oliver was stunned. They knew. How could they not tell me? My whole life, everyone I trusted. I was living a lie. He is furious. "They knew? Why didn't they tell me? Why didn't you tell me?" "We wanted you to live a full life. Eventually we would have told you. I could only be ageless for so long before you begin to notice." Christopher glared over at his uncle and with some amount of disgust. "How thoughtful of you. Now I have to become one of you?" He didn't understand why his uncle had already given up on him not becoming a vampire. "Why can't we stop Draven from turning me into a vampire?" Oliver sat there searching for the right words. "When I talked to Draven, he was set on you becoming his progeny. It's a long story, but I won't kill him just over you. Too many other people would die because of it. If we tried to hide you, he would eventually be able to find you. You are important to me, Christopher. I care about you. But I won't let other innocent people die for you. I don't think you'd want that." Christopher was perplexed. "How would other people die if I didn't become a vampire? What do you mean?" Oliver continued. "I could fight him. I might win. I might lose. but in the process, he is sure to kill other mortals like yourself. It's how vampires power their abilities. Older vampires can do some very powerful things, but it takes a lot of blood to do it. He would kill others to defeat me. I don't believe I would be able to kill him before he would resort to that. Oliver is right. I wouldn't want others to die for me, but I don't want to die either. So what do we do? Just give up and I become a vampire? Oliver sighed. There isn't anything I can do. Like I said, I did convince him to let you have a choice of who will sire you, either Draven or I. Christopher didn't like the alternative. He didn't want to become Oliver's progeny either, especially knowing how he had lied to him his whole life. I want you out of my house. I want you out of my life. I want no part of this vampire business. Oliver stood up. I understand. This is a lot to take in. I'll leave for now, but you can't ignore this. You must make a choice. What I did was out of love for you. I couldn't stop him, but I was able to make this compromise. He won't wait long for your choice. If you choose me, I will at least let you live for another 10 or 20 years as a human. You'll have to decide soon. At that, Oliver walked out of the living room and out of the house, leaving Christopher with the unenviable task of having to choose. Thank you for listening to Dark Choices Part 2. Hopefully you are enjoying the story so far. If you are, and you want to read ahead, you can go ahead and click on the link in the description below to buy the book off of Amazon. Or you can wait until Part 3. Click on like and subscribe, and I hope to catch you on the flip side.